Alright, what's up everybody? It's Sindri Gaming here. I have no idea why, but ever since the release of God of War Ragnarok, I've received dozens of comments from people out of nowhere telling me I look like Sindri apparently. And in complete fairness, I don't see it, but maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with me and if others have a point. But I never had people pointing that out when God of War 2018 released and we already had Sindri in there, so it's very strange. But suddenly, yeah, that's been catching me off guard as of late. Thankfully, I don't have the same germophobia though, but that's all a little bit off topic. We're going to talk about a news article that released over the last week, or rather, it was a podcast where a couple of God of War developers appeared and talked about the process of creating the story for Ragnarok. This was posted on the YouTube channel MinMax, where narrative director Matt Sophos and story lead Richard Gobert, hope I'm saying the name right, from Santa Monica Studios appeared and basically talked about the whole development process for the game. Especially something they highlighted, which caught a lot of people off guard, is that in an original draft, they had actually planned on perhaps killing Kratos right at the beginning of the game. In fact, he would be killed by Thor in that very first fight that you have with him. And the game would then actually get you to play as Atreus, 20 years later, rescuing Kratos from hell. So basically the game at first would sell the idea to you that Kratos had died in the very beginning of the game. Later on you'd end up saving him, and I presume also probably taking back over as Kratos, right? To then finish off the game, whatever it would have, turned out like. Now, Eric Williams, who is of course the game director for the game, he apparently didn't like the idea. He felt that they had already killed Kratos too many times before, and I guess also that it would have felt rather cheap, teasing his death, going ahead with it, yet then pulling back from that decision once again later on, right? Now, you can already imagine what the reaction to this was from many people who heard about this original story concept. I heard a lot of people say, look, God of War Ragnarok almost pulled The Last of Us 2 after all. This is what a lot of people were already kind of worried about leading up to the launch of it, right? Judging by some of the comments from Cory Barlog, I remember, and of course the overwhelming support that you saw come out of a studio like Santa Monica and its developers regarding the story in The Last of Us 2, which is what, this was clearly compared to. People saying Kratos dodged the golf stick and all those kinds of things. It's understandable, but at the same time, yeah, I don't even really know where to start with this. I do think, honestly, from a personal perspective, that it was an interesting idea. I would not have minded if this is something they would have explored. I also don't really think that the two stories, comparing this concept to The Last of Us 2, would have really been as comparable as people would have liked to make it seem. Because, of course, Kratos ultimately would have lived. It wasn't the exact same thing as like, oh, look, we're gonna kill your favorite character at the complete start of the game. We're gonna go into a direction you totally don't expect. Kratos would still have been fine by the end, and I think also a big distinction factor is the fact that Kratos' death was essentially already teased at the end of God of War 2018. It was something that we were ready for. It was something that Santa Monica Studios had prepared people for, that could have been a potential outcome for the game, right? And so people actually went into Ragnarok with those expectations of like, damn, Kratos could actually die in this game, right? And you might obviously remember that throughout the story of the Ragnarok that we ultimately got, it constantly left us wondering, like, shit, is the prophecy gonna come true? That's what the entire game was about, right? It was about, are we gonna be able to change fate? Are we gonna be able to revert what's been said in all these prophecies? The main one being Kratos laying there in Atreus' arms. Now, that being said, I am personally fine with the way God of War Ragnarok's story turned out. I thought it had a couple of fantastic moments, definitely sprinkled in a few twists that you didn't see coming. Of course, Brock dying, but there was also Odin actually, faking himself to look like Tyr. There was the portal conversation between Kratos and Atreus that I absolutely loved. I really liked the storyline of trying to change that prophecy, and for example, the encounter that you have with the Norns, where they kept sort of playing with your with your emotions. Yeah, overall, I was satisfied with what they did, although I will say that it didn't necessarily feel like the most risk-taking plot. They could have definitely done a couple more interesting creative things with it. Like, I know in advance, I myself had these theories of like, oh, what if they're actually gonna show us more stuff from the Greek era, rather, in this new perspective? That would have been cool, right? That's something they could have done. Yeah, they could have obviously killed off Kratos, which I don't know if that was really a decision that would have been appreciated by the fanbase as much. And if it, like, that's the thing. I always feel like a death like that, it can happen, but it does need to be earned. But that being said, God of War 2018, as I just talked about, already sort of set up that was at least a possibility to consider. And so this whole conversation about what could have been versus what became the actual game, it reminds me a lot about the conversations we all used to have back when Uncharted 4 came out, where everybody was wondering what would the original Amy Hennig story have looked like, especially because we even got a trailer for that particular game that already teased us that original story, and we could tell that by the final product, the original reveal trailer for Uncharted 4 wasn't really making sense anymore, with a Sam Drake on the hunt for Nathan, whereas ultimately that of course didn't end up being the case at all. And now, I don't want to, spend another 20 minutes here talking about Uncharted again, because we all know I could. All you have to do is bring up the series and I'll be able to just go loose, talking about what is, what could have been, and all that kind of stuff. But, I think that's kind of the problem that you always run into, even sharing these kinds of ideas with the public, is like everybody's going to have their opinion about it, right? And everybody is going to... that's the thing, people are gonna sort of have an opinion ready about what the better story outline would have been, but at the same time, I feel like in the end, it always comes down to execution. It doesn't really matter what the outline for your story is, as long as the events that happen in it feel earned, feel justified, and are tackled well, right? So Brock could have totally lived at the end of God of War Ragnarok, unlike what actually happened now, and it still could have been a fine choice. I mean, nobody would have really known what they had missed out on, right? You could have killed off somebody else entirely, and as long as the build-up to it was there, the consequences were taken in mind as well, where characters, for example, tied to the particular character that had died are actually showing perhaps remorse or regret for certain decisions that they made, or grieving over the situation, and it still makes sense in the end game, or in God of War Ragnarok's case, the after story, I guess, journey that you can still have, doing all your side quests and still going over what had happened. Then yeah, that's totally a decision that a creative director, if you'd ask me, can make. I think that is the big disconnect that I find myself in, even with, some of the biggest Last of Us 2 haters, where it doesn't have to be said that I myself wasn't really happy with the outcome of The Last of Us Part 2. It's not so much that I necessarily hated particular moments in it so badly. I just feel like they missed out on going in a different direction that could have been even better than what we ultimately got. I just wasn't a big fan of... Look, you can kill off Joel and still make that feel natural, right? But at the same time, what are you going to replace the game with? And what they replaced the game with is Ellie going on a revenge quest and Abby, showing us, I guess, a different side of her perspective in the apocalypse. But I didn't really find myself caring much for Abby's story. I didn't really find her personality all that appealing. I didn't like the characters that were surrounding her, the group of friends that she had, and Owen and all these characters. They didn't resonate with me in the same way that Joel really resonated with me in the original The Last of Us game. And so it's not so much about, oh, you killed off Joel, screw you, I will I will never forgive you for what you did, Neil Druckmann. That's not the way I work, but I see that it is the way some other people on the internet do behave. And I mean, we all know that the most extreme opinions are represented here on this space. It's pretty much impossible to avoid them. So I'm not saying that that is how I think the majority approaches things. You'd be easily fooled into thinking that it is the way the majority thinks. And so therefore, people are automatically labeled haters or fanboys just for either liking or disliking the story that we ultimately got. Believe it or not, I actually like it when stories take a little bit more risk, when they do try to go, and think outside of the box, I guess, and make decisions that you don't necessarily see coming, as long as they feel natural, as long as what you ultimately present your fanbase with still is impactful and is a direction that people will appreciate, then that's all fine and good, right? There's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. It's much better than just getting your cookie-cutter storyline, characters that don't really make you feel any type of way. I mean, Hogwarts Legacy released, and while I think it's a fantastic game, I really enjoyed my time playing it. It's just a super fun game all around. Story-wise, I'm not gonna be remembering it for very long, because I feel like nothing in that game really happened that was memorable, or that made me go, holy shit, I didn't see any of that coming. it lacked any impact. And you can say what you want even about a game like The Last of Us Part 2, but impact is something that it still very much had. And so even I can be, can sound almost like I'm defending a game that I ultimately didn't even really like that much. But it's because I do always want to try and stay as nuanced as possible. And I want to stress out that risk-taking is not something that I automatically reject. Now, at the same time, I do still have to go on a little bit here then about The Last of Us Part 2, because that's something that I do feel needs to be stressed out. What I also just didn't appreciate about Naughty Dog regarding The Last of Us Part 2 story is the amount of deception that they ultimately applied in trying to sell this product to their audience through not really communicating with them that they were going to be taking these risks. I think you have to be open with your audience what you're going to do, not in terms of actually revealing the moments that happen. I get that. I get you want to, of course, keep your secrets, and you're not gonna tell people about drastic moments that happen in advance. But simultaneously, the way Last of Us Part 2 did it, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it continues to be a conversation where it's hard to really say what should have been done instead, I guess. But as controversial as it may sound, I almost feel like you should have actually told your audience that Joel was going to die at the start of this game, because it would have just shaped a much more fair picture of what the game actually would have ended up being, and you still would have had plenty of secrets kept in store for, your player base, right? I mean, Joel literally dies in the first 2 hours of that game. There's still another 20 hours afterwards that you play where story stuff happens that you don't see coming at all. Joel still is a part of the game. That's something that you would have still hidden from your audience too, that he would have, come back in flashbacks. But the impression that I get constantly is that Naughty Dog is simultaneously afraid that its audience actually never wanted a game where Joel died, and that they never wanted a game where you play, for example, as a killer, right? That Abby wouldn't have seemed appealing enough as another main character. Naughty Dog knew those things going into it. That is my hunch. And knowing that, they decided to just tell you that you were going to get a different game instead, so that they could basically force feed you something you wouldn't have perhaps wanted to buy otherwise, at least a vast portion of their audience. And you can only think of economic reasons for making a decision like that. And that's, of course, what I consider to be immoral. And we see it constantly now too, even with the TV show, which, by the way, I'm not watching it. I'm hearing very split opinions there too, where some people really seem to be loving every single minute of it, and that's great. I totally hope that people are enjoying it as much as they are. At the same time, I'm hearing some people that, really seem rather mixed about it, I guess, that don't like what they've done and some of the changes that they've made in the storyline. I know that episode 3, for example, they decided to focus very heavily on Bill and Frank's relationship, which is something that was in the original game, of course. It just never really got as much of an emphasis in any way at all as what it now did in episode 3 for the show. But even there, an interview came out afterwards where, it wasn't somebody necessarily tied to Naughty Dog, but I think it was one of the directors for the show specifically, said that they basically felt like they needed to force this narrative onto people. They wouldn't have wanted to tell them in advance that this was something they should have gotten ready for. Rather, they just wanted to present it to their audience out of nowhere and then make them appreciate it or feel like they appreciated it afterwards. And this is constantly a pattern that I notice with Naughty Dog nowadays, is that they want to focus on their representation agenda, right? Which I've talked about a lot, which is all fine and good if you'd ask me. I don't have anything against them having an agenda. I want to make that very clear. I really don't. I just want them to be upfront about it. And I think Naughty Dog themselves realize it very well, that this agenda that they feel so strongly about isn't something that actually resonates with the vast majority of the people that play their games. Decisions that they constantly end up making, like killing off Joel, introducing a new character with Abby, focusing on Bill and Frank's relationship in the Last of Us TV show. It's all for this particular reason. People argue over context, like, oh, would Joel have so recklessly given away his name, to this outside group? But it's like, that doesn't even matter. What you really should be thinking about is the fact that Neil Druckmann desperately wanted to get him killed off and wanted that to be the future of the franchise, right? And it all serves that particular narrative that I'm talking about. And that's fine, because it's their creative decision. But you also have to be upfront with your audience about the fact you're going to be doing this. And that's not what they do. They constantly disguise what they actually want their storylines to be and wrap it up into like just selling you the idea that, oh, you're playing this awesome, engrossing, post-apocalyptic narrative with these and these characters who you know you're gonna like, and then that only turns out to be a small part of what you're actually getting after all, which contains a bunch of things that wouldn't have naturally attracted you as much. And this is where I feel the biggest difference lies with Last of Us 2 versus, say, God of War Ragnarok. If it had played out the way that Santa Monica is describing it here, they had at least prepared you. They had printed the idea into your mind that Kratos could be dying in this game thanks to the prophecy. They had already built up to it. And of course, they weren't even gonna do it in the end. Kratos would have come back halfway through the game or something. You would have saved him as Atreus 20 years, you know, into hell. But even if he had died, like, they had built up towards it. It would have actually made sense. And I mean, I guess the big question that you still have to ask yourself is, would they have been as upfront about it in the marketing or something, right? If you actually ended up playing as Atreus for such a large portion of the game, at first, would they have actually told you that you would have played as Atreus early on? Or how would they have marketed this game? That's definitely the biggest question to ask yourself. Yeah, guys, with that being said, these were all my thoughts on this potential God of War Ragnarok storyline that never saw the light of day. Let me know in the comments how you feel about, you know, the story that they described. Would you have preferred it over what we ultimately got? How did you feel about the way God of War Ragnarok did end up turning out? What do you think about, you know, all my thoughts here about The Last of Us as well? The differences maybe between the Uncharted 4 storylines that we've gone over a couple times here on the channel. It's a lot of food for thought. It's a lot of things to think about and to consider, I guess. And I hope that whether you agreed or disagreed with me here, you at least appreciated me expressing these opinions of mine. With that being said, guys, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, as I'll be continuing to upload gaming videos on a weekly basis. And then with that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back in the next video.